Hendra builds a new barn out of his old barn. We'll explain next.
Originally, this room was like a hellhole, but it was the place I'd worked for, years and years, and it was kind of my place. So this is very different. This is, actually, I'm not writing nearly such good stuff here because it's much too luxurious. I'm Tony Hendra, and you're watching Wild About Barns.
For 40 years before its restoration, this once dilapidated New Jersey barn provided an inspirational workplace for writer Tony Hendra. You may not know his name, but you've probably heard of his work.
He's an English satirist, a former editor of National Lampoon, who cast Chevy Chase, John Belushi, and Christopher Guest in their first major roles. He did it all here, in this barn, what Tony Hendra calls his best friend.
It was such a good place to write because, first of all, it was completely uncomfortable. And it's very important, I found, as a writer, to be uncomfortable.
Writers cherish a workplace that allows them to commune uninterrupted with their muse. For Tony, a cramped space in a decaying 19th century barn behind his home was ideal, but not for the reason you might think.
And it was also right by this trout stream that runs through the property. So if I opened the window, all I heard was not cop sirens going off and all that kind of stuff that is usually so distracting. I just heard a bubbling stream. So that I found that as sort of very creative. And as I got to be more established as a writer, it became a place without which I couldn't write.
But after 4 decades of working in that uncomfortable but creatively conducive barn, Tony realized it was on the verge of collapse.
So we decided that we would have it checked out by somebody who knew what they were doing.
It was a wreck. When we first saw the Hendra barn, the barn was almost falling down.
Architect Michael Margulies and builder Adam Wingren both share a passion for restoring historic buildings. And despite the barn's outward condition, Adam had some good news for Tony.
And I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well, this is not in such bad shape as it seems to be. And that's mainly because it's been built with real old hardwoods."
Old stuff doesn't twist, it doesn't shrink, it has so much more character than the new material does too.
And he started reading the wood. He said, if this is adzed on 2 sides and cut on 2 sides, that means it comes from between 1840 and the Civil War. And it's oak, so it can't be after the Civil War because all the oak was depleted in the Northeast after the Civil War, and so on. He had all these wonderful sort of bits of wood lore,
For these 2 barnwood whisperers, as Tony calls them, there's something almost sacred about these old buildings, because in addition to their historic value, they contain what Michael calls the life energy of the people who built them.
People made this by hand, so this is something when you look at the timbers in here, you see hand-hewn marks, you see places where there are gouges from the chisels and everything, and this is a part of American history. So it's really important to preserve it.
In addition to renovating the barn, the job was complicated by the need to move it 50 feet back from its original location because it was too close to the road. Each part had to be tagged and labeled so it could be taken down and reassembled like an erector set.
The difference between the new barn construction and the old barn construction, for the most part, is that the traditional barn construction is all post and beam. It's mostly mortise and tenon construction. For the older things that are no nails, usually pegs that hold something together, so there's a pocket, there's a tongue for another piece that goes in, you peg it all together.
It's an incredibly strong way of building buildings.
But the challenge wasn't simply in resuscitating the old barn. They also had to incorporate modern elements and still maintain the barn's historic character.
Well, it's interesting when you get into the design because you have to adapt it to modern use. You have to do things like adding bathrooms, adding a little kitchenette and things like that that were never in the barn.
And keep it to code.
And keep it to code. And keep it so that you're keeping the historic character, because that's what's so important about the barn. You don't want to lose it.
The most dramatic blend of modern and new is in what Tony calls the Great Room.
That was a very gloomy place because there was no windows in it. So actually we never really knew what it looked like. I mean, so when we actually walked in here for the first time when the skin was on the building, we were just blown away at what a beautiful room it was.
I don't think Tony is quite tall enough to close those windows up there. What is the purpose of them? And how does he even open and close them?
Traditionally, barns had windows that were really high, and one of the reasons is for ventilation. So we can get the air that's going up there. That's why they're so high. And they're operated by a switch. They're electrically operated.
Look at this handle. And this door.
Hello, Ingrid.
All right, you got to tell me about this amazing door.
Well, we made this door from scratch to mimic doors that are in other old barns. We used recycled hardware, probably from the 1920s or 30s. We used an old latch.
Throughout the restoration and updating, Mike and Adam succeeded in preserving the essence of the original barn, including Tony's old workspace.
Kept, surprisingly, all the rafters in this room are original rafters. I mean, from the old part of the barn, which means they're, you know, what, 180 years old. They managed to keep all that. It became a new place, but it was still the old place. The soul of the old barn was still present in the, you know, in the new structure. Still right here, which is I'm very thankful for, because I thought maybe I won't be able to. But I must say that it's very tempting because it's too luxurious. You know, it's not uncomfortable enough. I'll show you where my old friend lives on.
The memory of the old, less luxurious barn is kept very much alive with a kind of memorial garden marking the old foundation.
The barn used to be here. Okay, so here you see the old foundation. It felt to me like I'd sort of preserved my old friend.
And it's a nice way to document where the barn came from. You really see where the footprint was.
So long, old fella. I think what I most love about this barn, other than it's like a pal, you know, that I've known forever, is I love to think of the history that it's seen, sitting here by the road.